World War I and World War II history, and I have to say, this is the most gruesome, grotesque war crimes I've ever heard of, ever in my life. And again, this is history I have never learned and never heard of in all my years of education. I'm back home now to do a little bit more research. I asked AI for some context, and let me read to you what it says. Here's a structured list of the major kinds of experiments documented at Unit 731 in Harbin and its satellite facilities based on post-war testimonies, Soviet trials, so Russia, as well as Chinese investigations and historian research. Keep in mind, records were burned in 1945, so most details come from survivor accounts and Japanese confessions. Biological warfare experiments. Plague infection. Victims were injected with plague bacteria or exposed to plague-infested fleas, cholera, typhoid, and paratyphoid. Prisoners were deliberately infected through contaminated food and water. Anthrax was tested via injection, inhalation, and contaminated materials. Glanders and melioidosis spread to study transmission. Now, glanders is horrific wounds to the legs, and they still exist in some of the people that were sprayed with this as the Japanese planes dropped this on towns. For example, in Zhejiang, glanders is like a horrible infection, a wound that does not heal, ever. And we're talking about 60 years later. Syphilis, victims were forcibly injected to study progression. Tuberculosis and dysentery. Field tests releasing plague-infested fleas and contaminated grain in Chinese villages to monitor mass outbreaks. Physiological and medical experiments. Vivisection, which is dissection without anesthesia. Prisoners were dissected alive to study organ failure, disease progression and wounds. Amputation and reattachment. Limbs were cut off and sometimes swapped between sides or reattached in unnatural ways. Organ removal. Lungs, livers, and brains were removed for study while victims were alive. That is absolutely horrific. Blood loss studies. Victims bled out to measure survival time. Frostbite and temperature experiments. Prisoners' limbs were frozen with ice and snow, then thawed to study gangrene, and worse, smashed with hammers while frozen to see when the limbs fall apart. Tested various treatments like hot water until the flesh fell off the bone, weapons and ballistics testing, grenades, bombs, flamethrowers and chemical weapons were tested on live prisoners. Prisoners were tied to stakes and crosses like Roman crucifixion for range and blast testing. Can you imagine? They were bombed whilst stuck to a stake or a cross. Pressure chamber tests to simulate high altitude conditions. So they were subjected to increased pressure. The pressure was put up so high until internal organs exploded and their bodies exploded, basically. Gas chamber experiments with chemical weapons like mustard gas and phosgene. Torture and survival experiments. Dehydration. Victims were deprived of water until they died. Starvation. Observing how long humans could live without food. Seawater drinking, forced to drink only seawater until they died. Blood replacement with animal blood or even saline injected in place of human blood. Burn experiments, testing different degrees of burns via flamethrower and other devices. Reproductive and sexual experiments. Rape was used deliberately to infect women with syphilis or gonorrhea. Pregnant women subjected to vivisection, which again is dissection without anesthesia, to observe effects on fetuses, the babies. Babies were taken out of the womb and injected with diseases. This is disgusting. Forced pregnancies between captives to study hereditary disease transmission once they had the disease. Pathogen transmission by fleas, lice, and ticks bred at the facility. Extreme pressure and centrifuge testing to determine survival limits. Could you imagine centrifuge testing until you died? Nutritional deprivation to test effects of vitamin and mineral deficiencies. That's horrific. In short, Unit 731 turned human beings into experimental material. The Japanese called them maruta, or logs, like trees, like just nothings that you can just kill and dispose of. for nearly every conceivable kind of biological, chemical or physical torture, all under the guise of science and military advancement. Estimated 3,000 to 10,000 people, mostly Chinese civilians and POWs, plus Russians, Koreans and Mongolians, were killed inside the Unit 731 facility.